Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
Find a living in fisheries. The UAS Fisheries Technology Program offers online study from anywhere in Alaska, plus labs and workshops in many Alaska towns.
Is most likely a chum.
Find your living without leaving where you are. Fisheries Technology from UAS.
The National Weather Service.
And good Monday and happy 4th of July, everyone, and Independence Day. It is Monday, and as always, we encourage you to stay up to date with your local weather information. And today, a lot of folks are out and about and kind of taking it easy. Some are just doing the normal thing. Either way, there's a lot going on in your part of Alaska that could change things for you if you're not weather aware. And the easiest way to do that is call the Weather Info line at 800-472-0391 and find your weather forecast that way, or go online at weather.gov/Alaska. Now, over the next couple days, the weather information online is going to look different. It will still be the same service provided by the National Weather Service, but the web pages are going to change in how they appear and probably how you find some of that information. So we'd like to give you an opportunity before that happens on Wednesday to preview that new look and kind of get used to it. Don't bookmark anything just yet, but make sure you're keeping track of some of those changes there. So here's a look at the websites that you can use to kind of preview that information. We've been talking about it for the last week or so, and for Anchorage, that web address that you can preview it is w2.weather.gov/AFC. Fairbanks, w2.weather.gov/AFG, and Juneau ends in AJK. Remember, don't bookmark these because on Wednesday, when you go to the website, as you always have, weather.gov/Anchorage/Fairbanks or /Juneau, you will see that new look, and then you can bookmark the places that you need to go. Now, one of the really cool things is you'll be able to find places like Fairbanks or Tanana or Galena or Bethel or perhaps Healy or Denali National Park or the entrance area there, or Anchorage, Eagle River, anywhere you want. Juneau, Sitka, and you'll get that 3 kilometer by 3 kilometer grid. What you'll notice is that your forecast information is going to become a lot more localized for your information. So whereas you've been looking at a very broad area over the last, several years for Fairbanks, and you say, well, that's not quite what's going on where I am, your weather forecast information and details for you should appear a whole lot more accurate and precise for your location. So if you're closer to the mountains, it may indicate a better chance for mountain showers than what most people away from the mountains would otherwise see. Your information should apply more to you and your location. So be sure and check that out. You'll notice some changes. And if you have trouble, let us know and we can walk you through how to better use that information. Now, what you're looking at here is the hazardous weather watch. A flood watch is posted for about the northern half of Denali National Park there. We're expecting up to 1.5 inches of rain. Now, as we talked with the Alaska Pacific River Forecast Center a little while ago before the show started, they were telling us that the potential for a lot of that rain has abated somewhat, not entirely, but there's still a maximum potential of about 1.5 inches. That could bring up local streams and creeks for some of the park areas. And if you're hiking or got a backcountry trip planned later on this week perhaps, or even tonight or tomorrow, make sure you're using extra caution and awareness and have ability to get weather information in case some of those streams and creeks come up very quickly. And just a little bit of rain in just the right spot can bring those up very sharply and without a whole lot of notice. So make sure you're comfortable with your surroundings and are aware of what the changes could be in your area, and make sure you're not camping in any low spots as we head into the next couple nights. Here's what we're looking at for fire danger right now. Pretty hit and miss. The latest rainfall across a large part of the state, especially the interior, has abated some of the fire danger. Not all of it, of course. There's still some dry spots out there. We're still looking at high fire danger around the Kuskokwim Delta region, as well as the Kotzebue Sound area, all the way up into the west-facing slopes of the Brooks Range and some parts of the North Slope also looking fairly dry at this point. Parts of the Copper River Basin and around the Matanuska Glacier region and eastward, and still around Haines. Haines could use a little bit of moisture there. So we're still looking at some hit and miss high fire danger, but the interior locations have seen a little bit of improvement over the last couple days. Here's a look at the visible satellite picture, and as we get into the afternoon, you can see a pretty broad sweeping pattern from west to sweeping east. This is that upper level low pressure system that has kind of been pushing a lot of sloppy wet weather across most of the interior, south, central, and southwestern Alaska. Some of that has been reaching southeast, but you can also see a swirl of moisture right here. A lot of this has been kind of drying up as it moves northward into the north and eastern Gulf. Sure, waves of rain have been making their way eastward from time to time, but look at this drier patch right here. This has been a pretty common picture in the satellite view for the last several weeks now. So perhaps not as wet as it could be, certainly not entirely dry. But as you look out to the west, we are finding some dry spots there across the northern Yukon Delta, into the eastern Norton Sound region, into the lower to middle Yukon Valley, and then north and west, some patchy dry spots there as well. Overall, it's just an unsettled pattern. On the infrared view, you can get a better look at the North Slope, and you can see most of a southerly flow working offshore right now, and that is helping to encourage warmer air traveling northward. A lot of warm water is also moving through the Bering Strait and working its way up and around the shoals there. As that happens, more and more melting is occurring, of course, with the sea ice, and we'll check that here in just a few minutes. Looking out west, once again, that broad overall west to easterly pattern is continuing, and it should keep a large part of west, southwest, south central, and the interior in this kind of sloppy and damp pattern, at least for the next couple days. In the meantime, southeast had a fairly quiet day. Here's a look at the picture right now as far as the weather chart goes. Low pressure sitting out across the central and western Gulf, well south of Kodiak Island at 1,010 millibars. And southeast is on the drier side of this ridge of high pressure. If you follow that upside down shape U here, that's what that is. High pressure is well to the south, and that's helping to encourage that warm weather here and the drier weather moving through the southeast archipelago. Out across the Alaska Range and southwest, you can see showers and thunderstorms have fired up today. On the northern side of this boundary, across the Brooks Range and into Kotzebue Sound, you can see the boundary there, keeping some of that drier and cooler weather out. As this high pressure system starts tracking eastward a little bit more over the course of the next few days, we're going to see low clouds, fog, and stratus be kind of a regular thing for most of the North Slope. In fact, you can see a little bit of that drizzle setting up there with low pressure moving just south of Kaktovik and eastward. A few showers and thunderstorms will still remain possible through the evening hours tonight. Some of that from northway up toward Eagle and westward, maybe even to Fairbanks, and southwest. Watch for showers and storms over your region as well. For southeast, looks like a fairly quiet night for you. Showers all the way back into Prince William Sound, though, Kodiak Island and Kenai Peninsula, looking at some light rainfall. Out across a large part of the Bering, just unsettled and damp drizzle and light rainfall. Areas of fog there into the Kuskokwim Delta. And then once you get from, let's say, Unalakleet northward toward Nome, in that general area, rainfall will start to ease up and you'll get into more clouds than anything else, and it might even be clear around parts of Kotzebue tonight. For tomorrow, showers and thunderstorms will be widely scattered across the middle and upper Yukon Valley, all the way along the south-facing slopes of the Brooks Range, along a trough of low pressure that stretches all the way from north of Eagle to about Nome, and then southward toward St. Paul and St. George at 1,007 millibars. This is also steering a little bit of unsettled weather just north of the chain. Most of that will rain or drip on top of ships, but not on top of land, it looks like. Most of that will be out to sea. High pressure just south of Adak and Unalaska and Dutch Harbor. Nikolsky at 1,022 millibars is trying to stretch out and clear out the weather south of the chain and into the Gulf. We still have some leftover wet weather here in the Gulf, and we'll still have some light rainfall across south central. More showery than anything else near the mountains again for Tuesday. And you can see a few showers across southern parts of southeast, maybe Hyder down toward Ketchikan. And then most of that stays along the outer coast from Sitka northward toward Yakutat as we get into Tuesday afternoon. For Wednesday, that ridge shifts a little bit eastward, and as that trough of low pressure creeps in towards southeast, that should provide a better chance for more widespread light rainfall for more parts of the Panhandle as we get into the midweek. And you can see that stretching around into south central as well. Cook Inlet looks to be a little bit drier as we get into Wednesday, but showers and thunderstorms on the western side of the Alaska Range seem possible. Showers should develop across the interior. There might be some drier spots around the middle Yukon Valley and along the Alcan border. Watch for a better chance of wet weather. And there's that pesky high pressure system again, dropping in some of that cooler wet flow across the north slope. A few drops of rain and some sprinkles there, as well as areas of fog. That should be the most likely effect, as well as low clouds. And then out across central and western parts of the chain, another wave of low pressure tries to work northward. Remember though, we've got high pressure here trying to hold things back, so this may drift northward, but probably will weaken as it heads into the central and western Bering. Let's check temperatures this afternoon. A nice July 4th for many in southeast anyway, upper 50s and lower 60s. We saw about 68 or so around Skagway, 63 in Haines. Lower to mid 60s for a large part of Prince William Sound. Valdez, one of the warmer spots at 63. 55 though around Whittier, 62 for Seward, 64 in Homer, 61 in Kenai, 67 at 2 o'clock in Anchorage. Squentna was 59. Gokana, we saw temps in the mid to upper 60s, 70 around Northway, 74 in Eagle, and 63 in Fairbanks. Now, many in South Central had a much warmer day today than we had yesterday for sure. Looking northward into the interior, a low to mid 60s there, 73 in Fort Yukon, 63 for Arctic Village. And around the north slope, temperatures were hovering in the lower to mid 40s. Once you got away from the coast, as you see around AKwx, temps skyrocketed into almost another 10 to 15 degrees warmer. 40s and 50s in Kotzebue Sound. Kotzebue was about 47 with Nome showing 53 late this afternoon, 48 in St. Lawrence Island, 70 around Grayling, 68 in McGrath, and Bethel has had temperatures hovering close to 60 late this afternoon. Bristol Bay temperatures were in the upper 50s. St. Paul and St. George both checked in at around 50 degrees. Sandpoint was 55, 1 degree warmer in Kodiak, and mid-50s for Adak and Atka this afternoon. Overnight lows will stay in the upper 40s and lower 50s for most of Southwest, and the chain overnight with about 51 degrees in Nome, northwest coast in the mid-30s there, Nome near 36. The upper Yukon Valley and Fort Yukon itself, some of the warmest temps in the mid to upper 50s to about 60 degrees, mid-50s for the Tanana Valley. South Central looking at lows in the lower 50s, including Kodiak at 52. Southeast, close to 50 degrees in all areas tomorrow with highs in the lower 60s for your back to work Tuesday. In South Central, expect highs in the upper 50s to about 60 degrees, including Prince William Sound. The middle, Tanana Valley, Fairbanks, and North Pole, even out towards Circle, lower 70s there, 75 in Eagle, about the same there in Fort Yukon. Still looking at the warmest weather in your area tomorrow. Mid-40s to low 50s for most of the North Slope, including Prudhoe Bay and Dead Horse, about 55. Nome, you're expecting 58. Bethel, lower 60s. Bristol Bay temperatures, looks like a nice day for fishing, lower 60s for you. Upper 50s for most of the Alaska Peninsula, Kodiak Island, close to 60, and the chain, expect highs in the lower 50s with St. Paul at about 49. Flying weather tomorrow will be a little bit hit and miss. Around southeast, we'll start out with MVFR. IFR conditions in Prince William Sound down through Resurrection Bay. MVFR conditions for Kodiak Island. Bristol Bay also starting at MVFR. The western coast under MVFR conditions. And then things break up a little bit for Kotzebue and Norton Sound with IFR close to the Chukchi and Beaufort Seacoast for tomorrow morning. Improvement seen slightly in that regard tomorrow up north, and you'll see MVFR filling in a little bit from the south across Norton Sound in the afternoon, so watch for things to go down. Southwestern Alaska, watch for MVFR to take over more parts of the region. Not a big change around Prince William Sound, and southeast holds at MVFR through most of the afternoon with IFR conditions from St. Lawrence Island, Nunivak Island down toward the central chain. Checking your pass conditions, Anaktuvik expected to see VFR. Watch for convection there and in Adigan Pass tomorrow afternoon. Lake Clark and Merrill Pass will probably hold around MVFR through most of the day with Rainy Pass at MVFR. Windy Pass and Isabel Pass both expected to see marginal conditions through most of the day. Mentasta Pass will watch for convection, otherwise VFR conditions there. Tenita Pass we expect to see MVFR through most of the day. Portage Pass will hold at IFR as we saw on the charts just moments ago, and Chilkoot and White Pass also looking to be MVFR. The cold pool of air is dropping southward behind this overall circulation. You can see some of the cooler weather moving in towards St. Matthew and moving southward towards St. Paul and St. George, but there is still a wealth of heat across the Gulf of Alaska and the interior with freezing levels as high as 8, 10, even 12,000 feet over the open water. Icing potential is somewhat limited. Above 10,000 feet, it's pretty high up there in Norton Sound, Nunivak Island, some of the places to watch, as well as the Susitna Valley, the Kenai Peninsula, all the way through the Portage Valley, Prince William Sound. Most of southeast is in the clear, and watch for some freezing, perhaps above 9,000 feet there for light to isolated moderate icing potential. Also hit and miss across the chain tomorrow. The jet stream has that circulation we're talking about sitting right across the Bering. This is at 30,000 feet, so that fast-moving river of air is steering cooler, drier weather in from the western Bering Sea and trying to push that into Alaska. However, the Pacific jet here is moving that wave train of moisture right here across the northern Pacific and into the Gulf, and at times some of that kind of get sloshed up here, just kind of like putting your hand in the puddle and just kind of lapping that up into Alaska. And that's exactly what's happening here. So every time one of those little pushes comes through, we get another round of rain and thunderstorms across the region. And at 9,000 feet, you can see those winds supporting that at lower levels really aren't moving that fast. Wind speeds are only about 10 to 15 knots or so. Very light from the south across southeast, very light across the interior, and well, not as light across the western Bering Sea, about 15 to 25 knots, but they're not that strong either. The fastest winds we have on the chart are around 25 knots across the southern tip of the Alaska Peninsula. Same goes for 3,000 feet. Most winds across the interior are very light from the west and southwest. The North Slope also looking at some of those lighter southwesterlies. A little bit of an offshore flow for Kotzebue Sound. A little bit of an onshore flow for southeast, about 5 to 10 knots there. So all in all, things are pretty slow. Turbulence potential, not much to write home about, folks. Showers and thunderstorms are possible. And of course, in the vicinity of showers and thunderstorms, watch out for isolated severe turbulence, icing, and of course, lightning, downdrafts, and all that nasty stuff. Steer clear. That's a look at your aviation forecast. We'll be back with the rest of your marine weather here in just a few minutes. Stay tuned.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Mary O'Connor with the Alaskan Aviation Safety Foundation and the National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health. On behalf of Alaska Public Media, thank you for watching Hangar Flying. This evening, we are very happy to have Ross Nixon back as our guest. Ross is the author of a new book called Finding Carla, the story that forever changed aviation search and rescue. Welcome back, Ross.
Hi, Mary. It's good to be back.
So we've been having a conversation about the story of Carla in the book, and her family was in an airplane that crashed. After the crash, searchers went out looking for the family, and they knew in general where the airplane might be, but they never found them in time to rescue them. Can you talk about flight plans, and were they on a flight plan, and how might that have helped or hindered the search?
Sure. Well, you know, this situation here, again, it was a flight from Portland down through Oregon to Medford and then over to Redding, California. And they did file a flight plan. You know, when the pilot left Portland, he called up the flight service in Salem and filed, you know, Redding and then down to Sacramento to San Francisco. And they did go down on the leg between Medford and Redding, California. The plane iced up, put it down in the mountains. Everybody survived. And they were a little ways off the airway. And I believe it was because he was so high up when he iced up. You know, he might have tried to get that thing down and got a little ways off course. But other than that, you know, they, in their notes and the diaries that they left behind, they were wondering why nobody was looking for them, because, you know, they were saying we were on a flight plan. There's Omnis, you know, what they called VORs back then, and you know, air bases all around us. How come no one's looking for us? And it sounds like the search efforts at the time, they were based on some budding technology, you know, looking at some weather radar and stuff, and people decided that a Cessna 195 couldn't have flown as far south of Medford as these folks made it. And so a lot of the searching was up on the northern end of their route. And then, you know, so that was one of the problems. And then the problem was that, you know, again, they deviated a little bit, I think, because they had to put it down and he was iced up. They described being iced up without control, so he got a little ways off the airway. And then I think that the weather was so bad that it complicated the factors of, you know, really doing a good airway search. And when I put this together, that was one of the hardest things to do, was to come up with any CAP records. They just really didn't exist. And the best I could find is that there was a C-45, you know, Beechcraft Air Force that took off from the Hamilton Air Base, and they did an exact route search. You know, they flew from, you know, Hamilton, got up there to Sacramento, Redding, and flew it. But, you know, when you read the diary and you look at the weather, I don't think that anyone was able to see much for a long time because the weather was just so bad. There had been a route search done by some Grumman Albatross, you know, SA-16s out of Hamilton Air Base too, and you know, those are some high-flying, big old twins. And then, you know, they had to import searchers for this area too, because the CAP bases were all You know, usually in the mountains, they just didn't have a lot of airports, so there weren't, you know, so a lot of the CAP people were from elsewhere, so maybe not that familiar with the airways and the route. And that could have complicated it a little bit, but it seemed to me that most, you know, everybody just sort of had this idea that the plane, you know, would have gone down further north than where it did. And, you know, the fact that this guy made it, if he would have just been a little bit higher, you know, 500 feet higher and a quarter mile to the west, he would have, you know, cleared the last peak in the Trinity Mountains, and he would have been over the big flats there of California, and he probably would have survived this event. So those are some of the things about the flight plan and complicating factors. So
basically, though, what I'm hearing is that a flight plan isn't a fail-proof way to ensure that a search and rescue operation will take place if there is a crash.
No, it's not at all. It's a good idea. You know, it's a tool to use, and it's one of the cards you can use and play, but I think it's a good idea to have, you know, survival gear, have other ways to communicate. You know, we have different technology now than we did back in 1967, and so there's things you can add to it.
Sure, like satellite tracking devices and...
Yeah, you know, the spider tracks and, you know, radio or sat phones. You know, different types of PLBs. I mean, those are all things that can help reinforce the flight plan. And then, you know, and really sticking with your flight plan, I think, is huge as much as possible. If you need to divert, you know, usually you can get high enough to talk to somebody and let them know that you're changing your plan.
Exactly.
And, yeah.
All righty. Well, thank you so much for being our guest on Hangar Flying. You've done a fantastic job in telling a very difficult and heartbreaking story. And we look forward to talking more about how we can prevent this from hopefully ever happening again. Thank you.
Well, thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for watching Hangar Flying. Please tune in to our next show, where we'll be speaking with Ross Nixon again about some ways to decrease search and rescue time. Until next time, fly safely.
Thanks, Mary. Here's a quick check of sea surface temperatures. We don't show this all the time, but I wanted to point out something really interesting to me. The warm water coming out of our rivers, of course, is warming up some of the coastal areas all the way from Norton Sound to Southwest. This is a little bit on the warmer than normal side. A lot of this is working up toward the shoals in the Chukchi Sea, and a lot of the water we're seeing in the Gulf is somewhere between 3 to 5 degrees above normal. All of this shapes our weather all the time. Sea surface temperatures and the weather over Alaska definitely linked together. So you can see the result of that warmer water working its way into the Chukchi Sea. That's not unusual for this to happen this time of the year, but it is happening quickly right now, and you can see that some of the larger concentrations of ice have moved away from the shore around Barrow and Prudhoe Bay and Wainwright. So there's still ice there in those light shaded blue areas. The darker shades of blue, of course, open water, entirely open at this point. So changes continue, and as the next wave of weather moves through, there will be more changes up north. Here's a look at southeast now. Light winds for most areas with the exception of Lynn Canal, 20 knots with a 4-foot sea with winds coming in from the south. Southeasterlies working up the coast, on the outer coast that is, with very light winds up around Yakutat, only 5 knots or less. As we get into Wednesday, look for winds to push a little bit harder from the south and southeast. Still fairly light, 5 to 10 knots in all areas, east and southeast as you get up across the outer coast. Yakutat becomes offshore winds, 15 knots with a 5-foot sea. 20 knots continue inside of Lynn Canal for Wednesday. For Tuesday, light winds in the north and western Gulf and inside of Prince William Sound, 10 knots with a southerly flow, 2-foot seas there, southwesterlies inside of Shelikof Strait, a 3-foot sea, 6-foot seas east of Kodiak Island, and light southerlies coming up Cook Inlet for all of our friends hanging out on the coast with their nets. 3-foot seas expected there on Tuesday. Diminishing even more on Wednesday. A southwesterly flow coming up Cook Inlet, 2-foot seas expected there. Light and variable winds across the north and western Gulf, and inside of Prince William Sound, 2-foot seas expected there. A westerly flow develops in Shelikof Strait and passes over Kodiak Island with a 5-foot sea on the other side on a 15-knot wind there for Wednesday. Inside Bristol Bay, southwesterlies 15 knots with a 3-foot sea. Look for winds down the coast to be a little bit stronger, about 20 knots there. Westerlies on the Pacific coast side with 6-foot seas on 15 knots. For Wednesday, 15 knots inside of Bristol Bay, 20 to 25 otherwise across the Pacific coast and down the Bering Sea coast. About 7-foot seas in most areas with the exception of inside of Bristol Bay with that 5-foot sea. For the Aleutians, a broad southwesterly flow there, generally 15 to 20 knots in all areas, 4-foot seas in the west, 4 to 5-foot seas in the east, and a little bit of a changing flow south of Adak and Atka as we head into Wednesday. That becomes southeasterly and picks up to about 20 to 25. South and westerlies will continue for the central and eastern chain at about 15 to 20. Look for 4 to as high as 6-foot seas in all areas in the east. For the west coast, a changing wind direction there north of Nunivak Island. Otherwise, you can see an east to northerly flow across the northern Bering and southwesterlies 15 to 20 from the Kuskokwim Delta through the Pribilofs with a 4 to 5-foot sea there on Wednesday. A little bit more of a westerly direction. 5-foot sea expected there on Wednesday, and southwesterlies working up the northern Bering over St. Lawrence Island and west of St. Matthew at about 10 to 20 with 3 to 4-foot seas on Wednesday. And for the north slope, look for a broad easterly flow, 15 to 20. There's still enough ice here that we're not forecasting sea heights in most areas right now, with a 4-foot sea that is expected around Kaktovik and the eastern Beaufort Seacoast. Light north and easterly winds coming down past Cape Lisburne up to 15 knots outside of Kotzebue Sound. And by Wednesday, 10 to 15 across the north, and looking for 10 to 15 from the south and east across the Chukchi Coast. Look for 2-foot seas outside of Kotzebue Sound and around Kaktovik, also expecting about a 2-foot sea there for Wednesday. Let's recap your weather across Alaska. One thing to note there, if you're in the Denali National Park area or around Healy, about the northern half of Denali National Park is still under a flood watch at this point. We have concerns that there could be a little bit of an extra period of rainfall. It could bring rainfall totals of 1 to 1.5 inches through the region. That's a little bit on the outside chance right now, but if that does happen, that could bring up streams and creeks and rivers very quickly and with not a whole lot of notice. So make sure you have a way to get weather information and be aware of your surroundings and make sure you're not camping in the low spots over the next couple days in case a quick rise does happen where you are. Otherwise, showers and thunderstorms will be widely scattered across the interior and west of the Alaska Range. Look for a few showers in southeast, a better chance on Wednesday, and more showers for southwest as we head into Wednesday. Thanks for watching. We'll see you again tomorrow.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.
Alyeska Pipeline Service Company, fueling philanthropic programs and dedicated to creating educational and professional opportunities for Alaska Native people.